Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's web seminar, Test Automation Challenges in the Financial Industry, sponsored by Kobiton and featuring our speakers from GreenSky, Crystal Escalante, Ryan Silvera, and Mason Dula. I'm your host from TechWell, Beth Romanek. Thanks for joining us. Before I hand it over to our speakers, let me explain this console you see in front of you. The three panels on your screen can all be moved around and resized. At the bottom of your console, you should also see a widget toolbar. If you click the Handouts widget in the middle, the one that looks like a piece of paper, you can download a PDF of the speaker's slides today. If you have any technical issues, please let us know by typing in the Questions and Answers panel on the left. Of course, this is also how you can submit questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. Finally, for your best viewing experience, please close any unnecessary applications you have running in the background. We are recording this web seminar, and it will be made available to watch on demand. Once the recording is ready, we'll send you an email with instructions about how you can watch the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Carla Black with Kobiton for an introduction.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be presenting test automation challenges in the financial industry with our panelists over at GreenSky. We have Crystal, Ryan, and Mason, who are very lucky to join us today for this conversation. Thanks for joining us. Y'all, if you want to start introducing yourselves.
Hi, this is Crystal Escalante with GreenSky.
This is Ryan with GreenSky. I'm a QA lead on the mobile project.
Yeah, this is Mason. I'm an automation engineer for GreenSky.
Awesome. So before we start diving into our total presentation today, we just want to give our attendees a quick overview of GreenSky and what exactly you guys do.
Yeah, so GreenSky was founded on the idea that payment, credit, and commerce could be enhanced using technology delivered via an elegant user experience. We believe payment and credit could be an asset that empowers and enables commerce, not a distraction or impediment. Today, GreenSky delivers a service that helps businesses grow and delight their customers.
Great. So with that, I understand that you guys might have, that you're in the financial fintech industry. So if there are some best practices for incorporating Devops and test automation and Agile into this highly regulated industry?
Yeah, so our goal is to enable fully automated regression testing as well as visual validation of mobile app code to try and ensure that all of our server-side components have been fully tested. So that basically means we're going to try and enable continuous delivery by employing mobile test automation code, dynamic app updating capabilities, just so we can push out constant updates to production. Continuous integration, so that's basically we're trying to leverage common build and release services. Basically, we also want to make sure that we're constantly pushing and updating our code and that it's getting integrated and that build is kicking off automatically and being tested automatically. On the more front-end side, we're instituting continuous monitoring, stuff like that. So for analytics, we're wanting to make sure we keep track of crashes, outages. We want to make sure that new features are being used. If so, we try to figure out why not. Fallback services, whether those get triggered, that sort of thing.
Great. So seeing that you guys have to be constantly testing and constantly pushing updates to production, are there some rules that your organization and industry has to follow? And is there any code compliance that have to be enforced in some way?
Yeah, so the biggest rule is no PII and no PCI data stored. And a lot of our things, like mobile specifically, we don't cache data, especially on the device, to avoid any issues there. And for enforcing this code compliance, we use products like SonarQube, and we also have quality gates that we use as we move through environments, and then other security tools to enforce that, like Contrast, AppSpider, et cetera. And another thing that kind of lends to that is, since we can't use live data, we have to use redacted data. And this causes us to have to do some creative things with test scenarios. And even though it's not specific, or it's not specific to like what the user would experience, we get really close to that and get creative to make sure that we can cover most of the experiences, so that when it goes live, the customer gets the proper experience, and we still have that security net there as well.
Gotcha. So if it's not, if some of them aren't completely specific to user experience, does that affect your testing strategy in day-to-day operations?
Yeah, I mean, we look at services, we look at things that the user doesn't see directly, but will influence their experience overall. And we try to cater any, like if any issue pops up in production or any feedback, we try to cater that in the lower environments with the limitations we have, since we are in the financial space. So we can't use their SSN, we can't use their logins, we can't use those specific things, but we can create things that look very similar, behave similar, so that we can make sure we pinpoint those areas.
Okay, sounds good. So with that, what led your team to explore automation to begin with?
So from the beginning, we've always had this intent of using automation in our delivery pipeline. Automation is just a great tool for flexibility, and in releases, it allows you to test more without sacrificing risk. And this is also a good asset for investing smaller businesses to have, because when you're smaller, you can't commit all the resources. So if you can commit some resources to creating automation, then that kind of gives you the extra person for like overnight runs and such.
And do you feel like you guys are, even though you're a smaller corporation and you can't commit all your resources, so you guys were exploring manual testing to begin with, and then that just needing an extra person led you to explore automation?
Yeah, correct. So manual is always the go-to, because when you have that fallback of, oh, well, if your automation tools aren't working, you need to have the test cases, right? So that's obviously the first thing we do. And then with the automation approach, we try to use the resources we have, and then you bring on someone who's more dedicated to automation to help you build that suite. And then that allows you to essentially exponentially grow your suite, so you can cover more of the application as you grow as a company, because then you get to the point where you have a team of automation engineers, right, that work with your manual testers to keep both in parallel. So it's a great growth strategy to make sure that you have, let's say one manual resource, one automation resource, have them coordinate, and then grow from there.
It's something that sometimes gets lost with the manual test cases is the reusability of them, especially when you have users. You want to give them some type of guideline to be able to walk through the application, especially if it's new functionality. And these guys will utilize those manual test cases for that user experience as well as get input from them to grow those. And therefore that feeds the automation battery as well.
That's awesome. If we could go back to the previous slide just real quick, when we're talking about, could we just go in a little bit more on how automation really enhanced your delivery process?
Yeah, so the one thing I mentioned is just the larger amount of suites. So if you had to run, some manual tests to get a release out, and you could only have the manpower for 10 of those tests, then you run those 10, right? And you kind of sacrifice the ones you can't run. With automation, if those 10 are automated, then there's an extra 10 tests you can now execute. So you're executing more without having to give up on risk and not be able to hit the points, the extra points that you want to hit in your application. And then in addition to that is the times when people aren't working, right? So we have scheduled automation that essentially runs at certain times when we're not in the office, which means we're now having these extra test cycles we're getting in, when an employee can't physically be there, which is beneficial because that also helps towards maintaining stability, which is huge for your test suites.
And I should also point out that we have automation running against any time we push code changes, not only to automation, but also it should kick off a new build when the devs push code changes and things like that, just so that we make sure that any little minor changes that happen in there, we don't find out later that it's broken. We find out as soon as possible that something's gone wrong.
Exactly.
Part of our continuous integration process.
Right.
Right. So when you're evaluating for automation, how do you need to evaluate for new software and QA tools, and also speaking to the code compliance and any enforcements that any rules that you need to enforce?
Sure. So starting with the first part of that question, whenever we're evaluating new tools, you start with the very basic thing. Does this meet all of our criteria? Can it do the things that we need? Does that means can it test whatever functionality we need it to and hit the things that we need it to out of the box? And if not, how much are we going to need to write on our own versus another tool? So it's basically kind of at that point a development time, like cost benefit analysis. Past that, it's a matter of, well, with our current infrastructure, the way we have our app and everything set up, is this code going to be able to be, are we able to integrate it in a way that is stable, that we kind of don't have any code fragility or things like that. Past that, when you're looking at other tools to integrate with, like if you're going with cloud-based devices or anything like that, probably the most important thing for us was reliability, uptime, and support. Those are things which, no problem, Ryan. Those are things which, if you test enough tools, you realize not everyone has the same level of support. So when you do have issues with reliability and uptime, which always happen regardless of any tool that you're using, if you have that support in place to immediately reach out and get that fixed as quickly as possible, that's kind of the game changer between whether a release might go out or not. And the second part of your question was?
When you're evaluating the software and any new QA tools, do you have to consider the code compliance and any other rules that you need to enforce within the industry?
I mean, sure. We, much the same as with any of the rest of the code that we use, we try to veer away from any exposure for non-public information of our accounts, that sort of thing. Outside of that, like inside of our organization, we do have standards that we try to adhere to. That way we have easy enough kind of cross-team compatibility with code and that sort of thing.
Gotcha. Just a real quick question though. What new technologies are you looking forward to when you're looking at QA tools? Are there any features that you see that are going to come out that you're really excited about?
Yeah, so we're kind of on the cusp at this point of AI-assisted automation, which is going to be big, whether, it's just a matter of when. So that's probably the thing we're looking forward to the most. Like, can we have this generate and extrapolate various different versions of test cases, or make sure that not only does it produce things that are repeatable, but things that are varied and kind of hit different points. So I know that that's coming real soon, and I know there's a lot of, at least in the nerdy realm that I live in, there's hype built around it. So that's probably the number one feature we're looking forward to.
Yeah, and to that point, what we recently just talked about was automation gives you that ability to run when you don't have people around. So now with that AI layer, you can have it not only just run what existed, it can enhance that so that you would come back in the morning and your test cases could look different, or they could have notes, or they could be more refined, or objects could be defined better. Like, that's another step of keeping that enhancement process going daily. That would be a huge win, especially for like smaller companies that are just starting to build their suites.
And also in the area when something does go wrong, the ability for the code to say, oh, this went wrong, maybe the service to down check it and be able to find ways to still verify that test case, that sort of thing.
And speaking of services, something that we look for with all of the vendors that we reach out to for various points of data is to mock APIs. So maybe there's a charge for every hit that we go to for a certain service, and we want to downplay that cost during all the tests and automation runs that we do. So tools that offer mock APIs, those are highly beneficial for us. So to Ryan's point, Firebase is one of those things that we use.
Awesome. So just a real quick question somebody had. They wanted to know which tool that you decided on.
Yeah, so in this particular instance, the kind of pipeline we go through is Appium, and then we kind of run that against our cloud devices in Kobiton. And we did go through a bunch of different vendors, and I won't name anybody else, but we did go through a bunch of different ones. And Kobiton worked out for us for a number of reasons. I would say the number one of which, usability was easy, and then support was just there. Like anytime we did have issues, it was taken care of usually. I don't want to raise expectations, but usually within an hour for us or less, things would get taken care of.
And from the, what Crystal mentioned about the API testing, we do use Firebase heavily on mobile, since in our company, it gives us more flexibility for certain releases. And that's also for like the redacted data. So manipulating merchant IDs that we can't actually mess with directly. We use Firebase a good bit, and it's been a great help with our pipeline.
That's great. That's great to hear. So speaking of Kobiton, we are a mobile app testing platform. With Green Sky, did you have some regulatory challenges that you faced specifically with mobile?
Yeah, so with mobile, we use native applications. So that means we're dealing with Android, Apple, and their standards for going to their store. And one thing they are very specific about is, since we're a financial app, your disclosures have to be prominent and clear and accessible at a high level. So like people shouldn't have to dig deep down into your application to see your disclosures. So we have a big focus on that as a company. And then also we have to make sure that we make it through the reviews. So like if you have certain screenshots that show your application off, those have to be correct. So it's just kind of dealing with the two companies and their different standards. Android's known to be a little more looser than Apple is. But those are pretty much what we have to focus on, our disclosures.
Gotcha. So going back to your delivery process and everything, are there any metrics that showed your overall success with automation? Example, how many releases did you guys increase to updates or anything like that?
So I can talk about like our specific tools we use. So we use Jira for managing our test suite in general, and then also our tickets. But that involves manual and automation. And in Jira, how we do it is we essentially track our total test library and then keep track of how much automation versus manual we have. So the more automation we have, the less manual scenarios we have. So we keep track of that. And then we use a tool called Report Portal to watch the pass-fail rate of those tests, so how consistent they are. And then that also shows us the growth of test cases over time that are automated. Right. So like a good example is I had 8 tests pass and then 2 tests failed during the last execution. That would be shown in Report Portal. Or for the growth, you would say on day 1, we had 10 automated tests run. Those ran well. And then on day 2, we had 20 run. Right. So you're showing that increase, that 2-time increase in Report Portal. So with those 2 tools, we're able to pull the reports we need based on the specific what somebody wants to see. Because we do have test cycles, which is more of a granular vision of that in the overall library. Some tests aren't ran as much as others. So in the cycle level, you can also pull reports to show how much automation was used for specific cycles. So certain features would have more automated tests than others.
Well, that's great. Great to hear. So we're going to start looking forward to the future. How do you see mobile and test automation having the biggest impact in fintech?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest impact that automation has anywhere is always going to be on time saving, the ability to cut out a lot of manual testing and catch bugs early before you have to find them in production and then walk back a release or something. In fintech, that's especially important, just given the sheer amount of data that we have to go through, and the fact that the fact that we have a lot of money on the line directly. A lot of apps might have like, oh, the user experience was bad, but in our case, if the loan doesn't go through, we're not making money. So for us, it's vitally important to be constantly testing to be able to make sure that we're able to decision loans and respond to client needs as fast as we can. So the amount of time we're able to save on manual testing, we can put towards making sure that the product is just that much better. In our case specifically, a lot of our clients are trending towards using mobile more. So for us, having that time savings is not an option. We have to have it.
Yeah, and this brings us back to that AI point, right? Which gives us that, cost savings you get from having the automation, and then the cost you gain back kind of increases that margin, which is great. But I kind of see AI playing the biggest part of this pie for smaller companies too, because that's the hardest part is getting started. So any help you can get from anywhere is beneficial in getting you on this path to getting your stuff automated, getting that pipeline set up. So that just brings AI up again to see if that ends up being as impactful as we all hope it is.
I think somebody had a question about the business rules when it comes to AI out there and how that would work, right? So if we've got AI rolling through our applications, learning from it, and then the data that's put into it, the analytics itself, if we gave it some type of knowledge to the rules, it could possibly work through and give some data back and learn towards the business rules as well. I don't know if you guys have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, so you essentially, whatever your goal is how the AI should be, like the pattern should be set up to, right? You kind of don't want it just doing whatever on a random setting. It's like, okay, well, we want to focus on the specific area of building our suite out. So we're not going to have it run through everything, and we're going to hand it these specific criteria pieces to play with. So a good example is on a page, if you have fields that accept, a wide range of inputs, if you really want to make sure that page never breaks, that's where you would want to focus. You would pass it a bunch of data that it can play with and manipulate to give you all these permutations, rather than saying, oh, just run through the app and give us whatever. So I think that's kind of how you would approach it in pieces.
Absolutely. The better way to leverage AI would not be to just let it run wild, but to give it focused sections, basically to help make sure that we flesh out our regression to have our maximum coverage, not necessarily just here's all the app.
Awesome. So it looks like we're going to keep answering some questions from the audience. So we have another question specifically about, I think we were talking about it in the success metrics. They wanted to know, you were talking about Jira and what other tool?
Report portal. So report portal, in our code, we essentially have calls that say whenever we run certain suites, it calls the report portal and logs that, right? So it's a separate logging system for the automation run as it's running directly in the code base.
It's a homegrown tool. It's not out there in the market.
Yeah, it's something we're using specific for us, yeah. But the idea is kind of how we use it in coordination with Jira.
There's various tools that are in the Atlassian market that do the same thing.
Awesome. So we had another question. Do you see machine learning and apps changing the automation approach of those apps?
I wouldn't say not entirely, at least not for a very long time. It would be nice to push a button and have it go and take care of it. I mean, I guess I would be out of a job, but but yeah, I think it'll be a while before it completely changes our approach. We're still going to have these target areas of the app that we want to hit that are specifically high risk, especially around new releases and things like that. And until there's a way for it to kind of generate its own code from square one, we're still going to have to build it out and have it kind of learn from what we've already done.
I think one good way to look at it is, early on when automation started growing and companies started using it, manual is still the focus, and then automation was considered a luxury, right? That's a word that was used a lot in a lot of companies I worked at. And to Mason's point, I think that same progression will happen now that automation is kind of a necessity for a lot of companies, where the AI piece is becoming what automation used to be. So now AI would essentially be a luxury, where it's like, oh, okay, it helps us do this. It gives us a little, it's icing on the cake. And then at some point in the future, as it progresses, it will become a necessity to have. And then who knows what the next thing will be.
Great. We have another question. How do you see the volume of test data getting created in a scenario where we are developing this, so for the first time and there is no test data?
That's not really a scenario we run into to answer that question, because our test data, because we're loan origination, we have test data available from the different bureaus like Experian and Equifax, and then we have our merchants data. But any time that you're developing a new system and you don't have that data available because maybe you're new to the market, it's a new app, it's a new field, you would just have to kind of do some maybe interviews of user experience and what kind of things you're going to look for, and then slowly start building your data cases up.
I hope that answered your question. We're happy to answer any other questions at this time. I wanted to ask specifically if we could go a little bit more into one of the code compliances that you guys have to follow. You mentioned that you can't cache data in mobile. Could you go in a little bit more about that?
I like your shirt.
Yeah, so with private information that we're not able to keep on mobile, the biggest security risk with mobile is that it moves around, right? So a person can have a phone, a person can lose that phone, and they don't know where it's at, and they just buy a new one, right? Well, in those scenarios, we have to account for the case of fallibility on the user side, where they could misplace their device, or if you have a company with a structure that, the senior person has access to data that not every associate does, and they leave their phone at lunch and associate gets a hold of it, those kind of things. So to avoid that completely, we don't cache any data that's entered on the device. We send that immediately to our services and have them do it, which are encrypted, right? So then whenever we need to get that data again, we have references, or we have reference systems set up in place, or reference rules set up to be able to access that data when we need it. But we never store anything on the device so that if anybody maliciously or unintentionally tries to get access to it, they can't.
Gotcha, I see. Okay. We have a couple other questions coming in. So is there an ISO that covers the financial compliances?
So we have various services that cover financial compliance, which we're audited upon. I'm not 100% clear on the question to know if that's answering it or not, but please do clarify in the question box if that doesn't.
Okay, we'll wait to figure this out. So I hope that answers your question, but if not, please reply. So yeah, I'm going to answer another question. In a combination with Jira, do you use the Jira Cypher integration? Yes, no, and why?
So there is a plugin, Zephyr for Jira for test cases. It's a paid plugin. We chose not to use it. We use Test Management for Jira, and then a couple of other plugins that come with that. that was just something that worked for us and by choice when we made the decisions.
Great. So we had a few more questions, and let's keep going. So we have a lot of test cases depending on one another. If one fails, the rest of them fails well. How do you handle this scenario? For example, if a loan creating fail, the rest of the test cases lock loan, submit for review, etc. fail.
So from the mobile perspective, we actually approach this on how we look at the application and how we test it is we have it divided, right? So in this, based on your question, I'm seeing a case where these are post-submission that you're trying to access. And how we usually handle that is we have the post-successful stuff separate from the rest of the application, right? So when we want to get past a successful application, we have a scenario that we know we'll get it to that point and then have everything run at that point, rather than saying, hey, run everything and then try to do that, just to try to cut down on the failure rate. Another option is with the mocked responses. So Crystal mentioned Firebase, and we use this as well, where we will mock the submit service when we're running that scenario, because it's all about the focus, right? So your focus is on your post-submission testing. So you just want to get there. You don't really care about everything before because that's been tested. So we turn on our mock APIs, so we ensure that no matter what happens, it will get us to that point so our automation can run successfully. And then you can also put that as part of your automation, that once it gets to that point in the cycle, to turn on the mock service and then proceed with your subsequent tests that all appear after a submission.
Gotcha. Okay. I hope that answered your question. We have another question down here. Have you heard of or used any tool that you think might be ready for primetime fintech testing in the near future? Because some tools make use of AI, but not to the extent of actually creating new tests for you.
Personally, we haven't. AI is something that we keep an eye on in the industry, but we haven't really integrated it into our pipeline or tried some new stuff out, because there's still some cool things with continuous that we're focused on at the moment. So we don't really have any specific recommendations on like what's kind of ahead of the curve at the moment. A lot of what we have seen is the what do they call it? When you run your scenarios, like if you try to click an object and it doesn't register, it will search for you and then do like an auto replace type situation. So you're seeing these behaviors that are kind of AI-like that try to help you build or try to help you maintain your test suites. But as far as like the future stuff, we haven't really gotten to that point. We've invested a lot of time into it.
Yeah, I would say with that in mind, I know Kobiton's talked a couple times, and they've asked us for feedback on if 4 things they're going to be integrating in the future. I know they haven't released like a full suite of tools yet, but I would say probably keep an eye out for some of the stuff they've got coming soon.
Yes, please keep an eye out. So we have our next question. Regarding the Jira integration, which tool do you use for test cases and reporting?
Test Manager for Jira and a report portal for test management.
Right.
They're plugins in the development market.
Yeah, I think Jira Test Management is the tool if you're looking for it.
Thank you for clarifying. We have another question. Have you encountered any danger of misusing AI in any organizations, and how would you ensure that AI is not used for avoiding personal responsibility?
We haven't run into that. I think everybody makes a conscious choice to do the right thing, and we build our tools the same way. So when we build our AI tool for our mobile app, we will be doing that. And I don't think anybody would sway away from the personal responsibility of it, because we're going to make sure that the tool is giving us the results that we want for the business.
That's right. I think a lot of people forget that there's always a human behind the AI.
Right. We'll give it bounds. Like there's, as much as we might like for it to take over and do everything. It's going to be more of an assisted automation tool than it is a tool that's going to completely replace and do everything. Just like we've had shortcuts come up in a lot of other areas of programming and development. This will just be kind of the next step in that it'll be able to generate things based on parameters it's given.
Yeah. Predictions is what we're looking for.
Yeah.
Glad to hear we can answer your question. Okay, so if anybody has any other questions, we'd be happy to answer them. I think if there's anything that you guys don't want to expand on, or we can answer any further, I guess I can hand it back over to Beth.
All right, thank you so much, Carla. I'd like to thank our speakers today, Crystal Escalante, Ryan Silvera, and Mason Dula for their time and all those great answers. And of course, a thanks to Kobiton for sponsoring this web seminar. And also a thank you to all of you in the audience for spending this time with us today. So everybody have a great day, and we hope to see you all at a future event.
Thank you very much.